So we see why loans and deposits are where they are on the bank's balance sheet. But there are a couple more things here. Let's start with the obvious ones, reserves. We already mentioned this. This is the cash that they have on hand. This is what you think about when you think about these deposits. You think that deposits, money's deposited in the bank, they have it. Well, not necessarily you, whoever you happen to be, but a lot of people will initially think of it that, like, this is how I initially thought of it. You deposit money in the bank, they have your money now in reserve. But as we now know from talking about fractional banking, this is just a tiny little percentage of this. So this is what we're really thinking about the banks have that they can make loans out of, or that is available for them to give back to people who look for their deposits. And of course, we also know they can only loan out a certain amount of this. They're required to keep a certain amount of it on hand at all times to make sure that they don't have to go into any of the safeguards we're going to talk about when we talk about the Fed in order to cover deposits. And they'll do this with or without requirements because banks don't want to be in position to say, well, I'll give you your money, but you got to wait a little bit. I got to go make a phone call to the Fed, and they'll drive a truck over, and maybe we'll have it for you tomorrow. They don't want to do that, obviously. So they have some in reserve, and this cash in reserve, that's obviously an asset. It's not a liability to have cash on hand, unless, of course, you're worried about bank robbers, but I mean, I guess they still exist these days, don't they? How on earth does anybody get away with robbing a bank these days? I don't understand it. Back in Jesse James' day, you just ride up to the bank, you shoot whoever gets in your way, you get the cash from whoever's smart enough to give it to you, and then you ride off. He was a bad guy, by the way. Don't believe any of these myths about him being a Robin Hood or whatever. He shot innocent bank tellers. So, anyway, that's not economics. That's history. But I'm a history buff too. Who cares? It's an economics video. So, reserves. One famous bank robber, I forget who, when asked, why did you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. Okay, they have a little bit of money. They have it in reserve. That's obviously an asset. Why do they have these? It's obviously that this is an asset, right? These are bonds. They're referred to as securities. They're basically bonds. We've discussed what bonds are. They're contracts. Contracts that say, I gave you money. Now you owe me. Fortunately, it's not a loan shark thing where I gave you money. Now, Gazzo says I should break your thumbs if you don't have the money, Rocky Balboa style. That's obviously not how it works. You're contractually obligated to the money, and you could take people to court, and if they say they don't have it, you go through bankruptcy proceedings and you get a little something, but usually doesn't happen, especially since most of these securities that banks put their money in are US T-bills, and those have never defaulted. Contrary to popular belief, they haven't gotten close to defaulting in over 100 years, and it's a safe bet that they never will, at least in our lifetimes. So you get a little tiny bit of interest from them, which is why banks would actually prefer to lend the money out. They get more interest from this than they do from bonds. The interest you get is lower because it's such a low risk thing. Here, you lend your money to somebody who has a good job and good savings, and they're getting a good deal on the house, and they keep up with their mortgage payments for a few months, and then they lose their job. No problem. They get a lower paying job, and they're trying to keep their savings from being depleted, but the job market's really bad. They never get a better job. Their savings go down. They can't afford their mortgage anymore. And this becomes an issue. Real life happens. It's not because anybody's a bad person. Things happen. So this is lower risk. This is something where you can be pretty sure that whatever value you're getting from this, you're going to get it back. So it's an asset. Again, it's money that went away. Deposits were made. Banks lent out some of it. They kept however much they figured they wanted to have in reserve, and then they went and bought some bonds with the rest. They don't always have people who are creditworthy looking for loans. So until they do, they don't want to hold it in cash because you get 0% interest from cash. But you sure do have inflation eat away at its value. As we talked about, inflation is inevitable. So this will give you some positive interest and protect you from inflation. You're not going to get rich off of investing in bonds generally, but you are going to protect yourself from inflation, and it's a good thing to have to just sit on until you can get some better loans coming in. But to get a bond, you have to take the money that is in the contract and you have to send it away. You have to give it to whoever you, usually again in banks' cases, it's the federal government. You buy some T-bills, you basically gave some cash to the federal government, and the federal government will pay that cash back to whoever owns the contract, which is not always going to be the bank. And this is another reason why it's an asset. Remember how these can be sold in the form of mortgage-backed securities. Well, so can these on bond markets. And banks do it all the time. They take some of their extra cash that came from deposits that they don't want to have in reserve, but they just don't have enough people looking to borrow. So they take these and they sell them on bond markets, or if they go and they take this money and they buy bonds on bond markets, the money goes out and they're just basically sitting on a contract, but then they want some cash in order to lend out some more money or people to cover their reserves, or we're going to talk about overnight loans. On the repo market, they'll basically borrow from other banks to generate cash quickly, but that's for a later video. But they might sell some bonds in order to pay back those short-term loans. It is definitely an asset because it's something they can sell. If a bank has a 30-year bond, they're not going to hold on to it for 30 years. Usually. They might, but it's just something that earns a decent amount of interest that they can sell. And as we'll see, again, when we talk about the Federal Reserve, banks know that they're often going to get some pretty good deals for these. So this isn't a bad place to park your extra cash. Whatever your interest rate is, whatever the face value is, you might just be able to sell it for more than it's worth to the Federal Reserve when the Federal Reserve decides it needs to buy a few more bonds at any given moment. That's for the Federal Reserve section of things, but suffice it to say these are assets because they generate streams of income, maybe only in one or two lump sum payments, but they also come with interest. They generate cash, and there's something that can be sold. So we know why all of these are assets. There's just one more thing here that doesn't make any darn sense. The bank's net, and I put this in parentheses here. The bank's net worth is a liability? Your net worth is a liability? Now, how does that make sense? The answer is it doesn't. What this part does is it allows us to be able to call this a balance sheet. Why is it a balance sheet? Because when you add up these three things, and then you separately add up these two, you're going to get the same number. If you didn't do your math right. These three, whatever number that equals, is going to be the same as these two. So when you add up these three, what you do is you go over here, you subtract this out from the value you get down here for the total, and that's your net worth. The bank's net worth, net, right here, not gross, net. The gross worth is maybe all these assets, but you subtract out liabilities. It's the difference between all of your assets minus your liabilities. That's how much you're worth. Worth meaning if you sell off every single thing of value that you have, you're not going to sell your cash, but you sell these and you raise cash. The cash you're going to have given the market value of these, the market value of a mortgage-backed security with a certain interest rate, risk profile, etc., and the market value of whatever bonds you have. If you're able to get that, this is always an estimated value. If you're able to get that, combine that with your cash, pay off all your customers who made deposits saying, we liquidated everything, here's your money. That's how much you'd be worth. That's how much money you'd be able to walk away from your banking life with if you're the one guy running your one bank. Which is not really the way it works, but that is what that bank is worth. If it's just going to go out of business, that's how much money they're going to be able to get when they liquefy everything. Or, more commonly, if a bank is bought by another bank. I bank with Chase, not because I started banking with Chase. I started with a small town bank in my hometown, or a small bank in my small hometown, and they were bought out by Chase. So I just, by default, became a Chase customer. That's fine. I get whatever I need. Lots of ATMs for me. That's if we get into discussion about credit unions and big corporate banks, why you might want the big corporate bank. It depends on what you want. If you want to be able to find an ATM with no ATM fees just about anywhere you go, you might want the big corporate bank. Depending on which one it is and depending on where you live. Bank of America, that's where my wife banks. We have to go to Boulder in order to get a withdrawal, but from where we live in Lafayette, where there are several places I can go in town or the next town over. So, brief aside there, but that is the net worth that if you're going to buy out a bank, you're going to want to see what all of these are, subtract out the deposit amounts, and that's what they're worth. And that balances it out. It seems a little like cheating, but remember, this is economics. We have slick little tricky ways of making everything work out to make things work. We simulate problems in models, we oversimplify, become unrealistic, but we still insist the models work, and life is just good as an economist. So that's the bank balance sheet. Let's play around with it a little bit. Going to push the ESCA button. And again, go down to the toolbar here. Feel like I'm on Home Improvement. Al Borland. What's up, 90s references? You missed those? Yeah, I do it on videos too. Anyway, I miss making them. I haven't made them on any videos yet, have I? So, everybody know what time it is? Tool time. Great show, Home Improvement. Anyway, who cares? So, what I put together here on Excel, and I'm going to upload this onto D2L, so you guys can play around with it too. This is the balance sheet with a lot of blank spaces, but they're blank so that we can plug in some numbers, play around, and see what we get. Some of them aren't blank though. They're not blank because I put formulas in here. C10 minus E3. So let's see, C, and then go down to 10. Oh, the total here. When these three are added up, you get a total, which, oh, excuse me. I meant to type this in. So this equals C. Oh, no, we're just going to do sum of C3 and C6 and C9. Boom. We have our total. When we put numbers in here, that's going to give us a total. I already did that there. E3 plus E9 equals that. And then we'll see we have formulas here as well. But let's say, again, round numbers, $10,000 have been deposited in this bank. Net worth is minus 10,000. What? Well, it's minus 10,000 because we don't have anything over here yet. But of course, those 10,000 go in. We have 10,000 in reserves to start with. Okay, that's 10,000. Hey, it balances out. Isn't that great? We set it up so that it does. But the net worth is 0. This right here, the reason I set it up this way is to underscore why it is that banks want to put their money here. They don't want to keep it here, especially since inflation is going to eat away at this. It's going to eat away at this too, so it'll still balance out. But net worth, who wants a net worth of 0? That just makes you a big old 0. See how the math adds up? Again, easy math balances out. So banks want to lend it out. Let's say they find, oh, let's have a reserve requirement here. 10%. We're just using nice, easy numbers. The required reserves, that's 1,000. Look at the excess reserves. That's already built in. C9, the reserves they have, minus J5, their required reserves. They only need 1,000, but they have 10,000. So they have 9,000 in excess reserves that we can use to make some extra money. So let's say $8,000 worth of loans come along. And then the other 1,000 go here. Of course, the numbers are all messed up because we put 8,000 here, 1,000 here, the 10,000. So this is only 1,000 now. And it balances out again. Same 10,000 in deposits. Nobody made a withdrawal. We kept 1,000 in reserves to stay legally compliant. We took another 1,000, bought some bonds to get some interest, lent out 8,000. That's going to bring us in some interest income over time. The required reserves are 1,000. That's 10% of all deposits. Again, this formula, well, we just plug that in. This formula here, sorry, E3 multiplied by J3. That's how you get your required reserves. Then excess reserves, once again, that is C9. The actual reserves you have minus the amount J5 here that you have to have, that you're required to have. So you plug the numbers in, make sure that you saw how if you keep the reserve amount the same, but you're lending out, where are you getting that money? You're counterfeiting. That's illegal. Bad you. No, you're getting it from the deposits and the reserves. So you have to subtract them from the reserves. This is 9,000 here. We got it out of that 10,000 that went in there. And that's how the balance sheet works. So you can play around with this a little bit. Again, I will upload it onto D2L so you can take a look at these formulas and get a good sense of how all of this works. It might seem like an extra step, but it's a good idea when Excel is set up with formulas like these. It's a great way to really learn how things work mechanically. You plug stuff in, you see how things change. It'll help you when the exam comes and you have to answer some questions. Hey, what are your excess reserves given all the other information you have? Well, having this formula in mind can help you out. So that is the bank balance sheet. And in the next set of videos, we will be talking about the